All right. I'm going to open us in prayer today. We're going to start from, I'm going to read from Psalm 8. I'm going to read from the Holman translation because it renders the divine name in the Old Testament, which I really like. So, all right. Yahweh our Lord, how magnificent is your name throughout the earth. You've covered the heavens in your majesty. Because of your adversaries, you've established a stronghold. From the mouths of children and nursing infants to silence the enemy and the avenger. When I observe your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you set in place. What is man that you remember him, the son of man that you look after him? You made him a little less than God and crown him with glory and honor. You made him Lord over the works of your hands. You put everything under his feet. All the sheep and oxen, as well as the animals in the wild, the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea that pass through the currents of the seas. Yahweh our Lord, how magnificent is your name throughout the earth. Dear God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity to gather here and to learn more about you. Today, dear God, we pray that you can speak to us through your word and we can learn what your whole idea for us was and how we fit into the world. And may my words edify and again, let them forget all of the heresy as they leave. In Jesus' name, amen. I was looking for a little bit of a giggle on that one. All right.
So fast, I wasn't sure.
Right. So is this guy serious? All right. So good morning, welcome. Thanks for coming again today. A few of you weren't here last week. We're going through a series I'm calling the New Testament in Today's World. Just going along with the fact that we are stuck. Wow, I don't know why I use the word stuck in the Old Testament. But we're studying the Old Testament through the New York City Catechism. And so following along with the book that I described last week from Dr. John Walton, the Old Testament for Christians, for today's Christians, just the Old Testament for Christians. We're going along with that outline. And today we're going to be covering like I have here, theology of creation. So humans and the cosmos. So what is the Old Testament theology behind the creation? And then what is the, hold on, come on, clicker. There we go. And then in particular for humans, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on something we've dabbled in before in previous classes, but never really dug into in detail, which is the image of God. And what is the Old Testament theology of the image of God? So we've heard, a lot of things about that, I think, over our lives. We've heard about that recently. And I wanted to dig into that a little bit more and apply what we did last week, this sort of ancient Near Eastern lens to that, to understand what could this have meant to the people at the time, and then how can we understand how it applies to us. So we'll go through creation, and then we're going to go through humans, and we're going to talk about humanity through, indeed, this idea of the image of God. All right, so I'm going to start with a question. When I say the word creation, what do we think of?
Beginnings.
I'm sorry? Beginning, yep.
Genesis 1.
Genesis 1, yep.
Out of nothing.
Out of nothing.
The natural world.
Natural world. There we go. So, right, I think, the ideas that we're getting, we either have this idea of the beginning of everything, the Big Bang, everything coming from an infinitely dense point, all matter in existence, and then some explosion. Where the explosion came from, the physicists don't know, it just did. And then everything expanding into the universe that we know of today. The other thing then is Genesis 1, the creation story that we see in the Bible. So I think, biblically, the creation story is told in Genesis 1. And so we're going to go take a look at Genesis 1. We're going to start at the very opening of the Bible. So Genesis 1, chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. All right, so we have the opening line is a line about creation. That, God was responsible for creating the heavens and the earth. And now we have the next sentence. Now the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. There's so much that we could do just with this sentence right here. But so the earth is formless and void. Then you have darkness. And then we talked about the Spirit of God a bit last week and in that video that I responded. And then we have this one here, which always used to trip me up a little bit, hovered over the waters. So before the earth is there, there's what? There's water. Well, is water part of creation? But there is water beforehand. What's going on with the water? Why is that there? We're going to skip the next few verses for a moment because I'm going to focus on this point about the waters. So verses 6 through 8, God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." All right, it's doubling down on the waters. There's something going. We can't just skip over that and say, "I don't know what that means," but don't worry. Nope, the waters are front and center right now. So let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. So God made the dome, separated the waters under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky. And there was evening, there was morning, the second day. So I want to stop in and notice something here. There's water, and now there's a dome. This thing like a snow globe, all right? We've got like something that's holding back water. Now, if this was permeable, water would just splash right down on us. This is solid. Their conception is that whatever is above us in this dome is solid because it can hold back the waters from coming from above into where we are below. And that dome was called sky. And we're not done with the waters. We're still talking about the water. And God said, let the waters under the sky, so that's the waters, that would be around where we are, be gathered together in one place and let the dry land appear. So now, you can think of like a parting of some waters. So we're gathering it in one place and then the dry land is going to show up. The dry land is called earth, and the waters that were gathered together, he called the seas. So we now have a name for the land, that's earth, and we have a name for this part of water that's been kept underneath the dome. We're calling that seas. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky. All right, so now on this solid dome, we've got light. It's going to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs for seasons, days, and years, and let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth. So we just had water. Then we had an expanse, space created, that was where there was no water, because you got the dome, you're holding the waters back. Now you've got earth, now you've got seas, and now you're giving lights across the solid dome. And they have a purpose. It's for signs and for seasons and for day and for night. So God made it so. He made the two great lights, the lesser light to rule the day. The greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening, there was morning, the fourth day. Okay, so here's my question. If you say we've got waters at the beginning, we've got waters separated via the dome, the waters ebb away to reveal dry land, and then we've got these lights. Does that sound like our understanding of how the planets and the solar system work? Where we have a sphere, which is the earth, and it goes around the sun. There's not water out there, there's just emptiness. We know there's space because you can travel through it, but that's pretty much it. And then the moon actually, so it's not that the sun and the moon are attached to a dome. It's, the moon goes around the earth, and then the earth goes around the sun. And seasons happen because of rotation along the axis of the earth, and day and night happen because of the rotation of the earth. Is this what we just read? Does it sound like our understanding? Right, Terry's shaking his head. He's like, it doesn't. It sounds like something different. Actually, I think I just made all the points on this slide so I can, I guess the other thing was the stars. So the stars aren't on some kind of solid dome as far as we think. The stars are billions of light years away. If you wanted to get to the star and you were traveling at the speed of light, it would take millions or billions of years to get there. And we are actually seeing light that was emitted billions of years ago. This is actually partially how they calculate the age of the universe. Like, what's the farthest away light that they can see? Okay. What about this? Does this make sense to us? We saw this photo last week. Do we know what this is? An Egyptian painting. What do we know about this? Do we know anything about this, or what does it look like?
Looks like different gods doing stuff.
Different gods doing stuff. Yes, you are correct. It is different gods doing stuff.
Stars, you know.
Okay, you see stars
On a dome,
on a dome,
the earth and the bottom, and the expanse in between, keeping them separate.
earth on the bottom, expanse in between, keeping them separate. Yeah.
But the dome is somehow humanish.
The dome is humanish. The dome is a goddess.
Yeah.
Remember last week when I made the important point, like there's no natural, supernatural distinction to people in the ancient world. Everything is the gods. Everything is a manifestation of the gods. And so the sky is the gods. The air is the gods. The earth is the gods. The storms, or lack thereof, are the gods. So what we have here is we have the solid sky with the stars. This is the Egyptian goddess Nut. And like Mark pointed out, we're in a dome. We have the earth god below. This is Geb. And then Geb and Nut used to be a thing, and now they're not, and they don't like each other anymore. And Shu's job right here is to keep them away. So Shu, the god of air, is holding up the dome, separating the heavens above from the earth below. And in fact, Nut also, these dots right here,
Water.
Nut is holding back the water. How might we know that that's water?
You're in a boat.
Because they're in a boat. Because up here, you have the solar bark. This is the vessel that the sun god Ra is riding in, sailing across the water over top of the dome. And you can see, I guess, over here, there's more than one, but you get the idea that it travels across. So this actually matches Genesis 1 pretty well. I made this point last week and I'll make it again. If you were to show an ancient Israelite this, they're gonna have absolutely no idea what this is. If you show an ancient Israelite this, even, frankly, I'd say even before the captivity in Egypt, they would at least kind of be able to get what they're looking at here, because this matches their understanding of how the cosmos looked and worked. So the ancient Hebrew conception of the universe, what you'll see, this is, and just to make sure I'm on the up and up, this is copyright 2012 Logos Bible software. You have what we just described from Genesis 1. You've got actually, could I do it this way? Maybe? No, it actually reflects off of it. All right, so you've got the waters above being held back by the solid dome. You got the waters below. You've got the land that's right there. Sun, moon, and stars that are going across the dome. Above the waters, you have the heavens where God is dwelling. Otherwise known as the three-tiered universe. So and they actually thought the great deep here, Sheol, so the realm of the dead, was in physical space in the ground. For all dead people would decompose into the ground. So the realm of the dead below, earth here, and the heavens above. So this is the ancient Hebrew conception of the universe. This is what we read about in Genesis 1. All right. So what does this mean? Why am I making this point? It means that Genesis 1 is written as ancient cosmic geography. I'm borrowing that term from John Walton, but you kind of get the idea. Geography being sort of like a map, now a map of the cosmos. So the geography that we read about in Genesis 1 is the way that ancient people understood it. I made this point last week, and it's very, very important this week. We are reading a document that was written thousands of years ago. Like, depending upon your dating, like 2,500 to 4,000 years ago. This is written in that culture. Had to mean something to those people at the time. God was revealing something to the church across time, but through those people. And so God is speaking to them in the idiom that they understand. God did not reveal proper Big Bang cosmology in here, or a Copernican view of the solar system. It wasn't like, okay, so you all, let's start back at the beginning. So I know you've seen all these things with like the Nook goddess and whatever. No, it didn't work like that. Here's what you need to understand. Particle physics, okay, infinite density point. Like, that's not happening in Genesis 1. That's not the point. So we're not getting a science textbook in Genesis. That is not the role that this played at the time. The idea of science didn't exist back then. You know, trial and error, sure, like updating your understanding based on doing something and then like that, sure, yes, fine, that existed. But the idea of a proper scientific method all the way through hypotheses to double-blind randomized controlled trials, something that we all got to learn about this past year, but that doesn't exist. They're not thinking that way. Remember, it's all the gods. What even would be this natural world that we're trying to understand the regular laws of? So we cannot expect an ancient text to answer post-enlightenment questions. We cannot expect, like I just said, the Copernican understanding of the solar system or the post-satellite view of the Earth. Like, okay, it's a sphere. Hey, it looks like this. To understand what God is speaking to us through Genesis, we're going to have to drop our 21st century understanding of what creation or origins is supposed to be and read it in the way that the ancient people would have read it to understand what is being communicated. So that's what we're going to try and do.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So these ancient cultures that had their own documentation of creation stories, do we know time-wise which came first? The Hebrew writing, the Persian, the Egyptian?
Do we know? I'd love to say yes, but I feel like I could always find a scholar who's going to place one thing on one side and one thing in another.
Do you have a date on the Egyptian picture?
Yep.
What's that?
I actually don't remember.
Pardon?
I actually don't remember what the date is on that. What I'll say, like this one here, the one I'm going to focus on, the Enuma Elish, which is the Babylonian epic. I was looking for the date on that, and I found some that said, second millennium BC. So that would be like pre-Abraham. I saw another that said, early first century or first millennium, which would be like around the time of Saul. And so it's like, it's somewhere here in 1,000 years. Well, that's not particularly helpful. What I think, no, I don't know. I can't make the claim as to whether or not we know with precision. Somebody else who's done that work may be able to comment on that. I don't know, Steve, if you know of any that we feel definitively about. But I think we can say that these things, just judging by them idiomatically, they're somewhat aware of each other, or, well, I don't know, I don't want to make that strong of a statement. There is a certain idea that permeated around the same time, maybe mid to early second millennium BC, that these all sort of resemble. And then as you go a little bit later, you can see the Greco-Roman idea is different than the idea that you're going to see in the Enuma Elish, but also similar in many ways. So the idea that the world was created via divine war. So you have the war between Marduk and Tiamat here in the Enuma Elish. You have the War of the Titans with the Greco-Roman. That's like 2,000 years later. So the ideas were persistent kind of across time. So, to go in this a little bit more, again, we're going to try and get into the ancient Near Eastern context to then bring that back to the Bible and say, all right, what's the same, what's different, and what does that mean to us? I entitled, though, maybe this will be the last time I make this point, I don't know. I titled the video for this week, Old Earth, Young Earth, Night Earth. Because I think that debate is missing the point of Genesis 1. Is it a question? Sure, it's a question. I don't know if Genesis 1 helps us answer the question. Because I think this is communicating to us much more like the ancient Near Eastern stories. So we're going to look at the Enuma Elish here. It's recorded on 7 stone tablets. So if you were to look it up, you'll see tablet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're not perfectly preserved. So there's parts that are redacted. There's one tablet that's almost completely illegible. So we only have part of this epic. It was discovered in the 19th century. I believe a whole lot of it was in the British Museum for a while. It may still be there, it may not be. Going to what I was saying with June, the dating is difficult. Maybe it's before the slavery in Egypt. Maybe it's around the time of Saul. We're somewhere in that, first to second millennium period BC. So the creation story here recalls the War of the Gods. We've said this now a few times, this is the typical idea that is being exposed in these ancient stories that leads to the creation of the world. So Marduk versus Tiamat. Marduk is then going to create the humans out of the remains of Tiamat at the end of this. Marduk would be the Babylonian god. So Babylon, we talked last week about how there were like clan deities and then national deities and then cosmic deities. So Marduk would probably be like a clan or a national, people who are identifying themselves with Babylon as opposed to a family god or a cosmic god like say Zeus. All right, so we're going to read the opening paragraph of the Enuma Elish. I had done this like 6 years ago and I'd forgotten this and I looked it up in preparing and I was like, oh my gosh, I can just do the whole class off the first paragraph from the Enuma Elish. This is great. I don't need to read the other tablets. Also, one thing I'll say, editorial, these things go on forever. I don't really feel like the story is developing very well. Could have used an editor. But I suppose when you're chiseling something on stone, once it's written, it's written. Oh, you should have said that differently. Well, okay, actually you do see this happen in the ancient manuscripts. You'll see things repeated as opposed to scratched out and redacted. Because it was like, oh, I made an error. And so you'll see a word written and then another word written that like sounds the same. So that would be somebody who's trying to correct himself during the copying, if it was like one of the scriptorium copying. All right, anyway, so the opening paragraph of the Enuma Elish. When the skies above were not yet named, nor earth below pronounced by name, only Apsu, the first one, their begetter, and maker Tiamat, who bore them all, their waters commingling as a single body, but had not yet formed pastures, nor discovered reed beds, when yet no gods were manifest, nor names pronounced, nor destinies decreed, then gods were born within them. All right, so the thing that I've highlighted here, of course, is, hey, we see water again. So we had water in Genesis, we have water in Egypt, and now we got water again in the Babylonian story. And you have Apsu and Tiamat, and they're kind of like indistinct even at this point. It says their waters commingled together. Oh, I call it rage against the sea. Because what you end up seeing is the gods having to conquer the sea very often. So Tiamat, actually, without getting into all of it, is the Babylonian goddess of the sea, primordial goddess of the sea, who has to be defeated by Marduk, and then you get humans. Baal, storm god in Canaanite mythology, one who is really important because you needed rain for crops. That was, being able to grow food was one of the things that was of primary importance in these areas. So when you read the Canaanite mythology, you see the god on whom they most depended, Baal, he had to defeat Yam, and then became the king of all gods. Yahweh, if you might remember from Job 41, Yahweh defeats Leviathan. Leviathan is the sea creature, the sea chaos monster. There's two. There's Behemoth and there's Leviathan. And, Yahweh talks about how, Leviathan is sort of his plaything. Where were you when I was, messing around with this, fearsome chaos creature? So the sea, and just imagine, like, especially, you're in an ancient context. This is your view of the world. You just look out at the sea, and it's just this swirling mass that swallows things up. As far as you know, it goes on forever. For a long time, there was this idea of the ends of the earth. It took centuries upon centuries to realize, oh, actually, you never fall off the earth. You can keep going around. It was a bottomless pit of disorder, chaos. The seas represented chaos. And they kind of do, right? Like if you've ever flown transatlantically and you just look down and you look around, Trans-Pacific too, I suppose. I've just never done that, so I thought of transatlantic. But it's like, there's nothing anywhere. There's just the sea, and if we're in that, we're done. That's what chaos seems like. And in these stories is the victory of order over chaos. The gods bring order out of chaos. And so that seems to be the primary archetype in these creation stories. It begins with chaos represented by water and sometimes sea monsters and sometimes, the evil gods. And it ends with the victory of the good gods that results in creation. All right, so the first thing here, There's the waters that are then ordered. So all there is water, but then there's a separation. Then there's land. Then there's the lights. Order is brought to chaos in those first beginning parts. Not through war. There's not any other equal God that Yahweh can fight with. That's not the point. And so that's one of the important distinctions here, is that it's not that there's a God of the sea that Yahweh needs to go defeat. He actually makes it very clear that he's so far above the Leviathan that it's just like playing tiddlywinks to mess around and defeat him. And it's like, and you as a human have absolutely no chance. Whereas in these other stories, there's a legit conflict. You don't know who's going to win. Are the Olympians going to win or the Titans going to win? Or is Marduk going to win? Is Tiamat going to win? So there's never any question. Yahweh is not doing divine war to bring order to chaos. He's just, through his speech, bringing order to chaos. And if we were to do some sort of Jungian reading of the Bible, it would be very interesting to go from there, but we won't. So anyway, implication here, we shouldn't stress about reading science into the text. That's not the point. Old Earth, Young Earth, 17th century questions. Okay, yes, I'm moving on to my next point now. Were there any questions here before I move on to the next part? I don't see any in the chat. Okay. All right, so let's look at this opening again. So, when the skies above were not yet named, nor earth pronounced by name, only Apsu, the first one, their begetter, and maker Tiamat, who bore them all, their waters commingling as a single body, but had not formed pastures, nor discovered reed beds, when yet no gods were manifest, nor names pronounced, nor destinies decreed, their gods were born within them. What else, I'm gonna throw this out to the group. What else might stand out to you here? Or what do you notice maybe through repetition or imagery or something like that? What sticks out? Mark?
Mine's at the end there, then the gods were born from them. So again, you're talking about that there's no supernatural. They were made out of nature.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know exactly who Apsu is, but
Mhm.
it sounds like God the Father, the first one.
Oh, yeah, a little bit. You know what?
And they're begetter and maker, like God Father, God Son, I mean, what are we?
Apsu is male, Tiamat is female,
Okay,
Geb is male, Nut is female. The male-female dichotomy showing up as part of creation is another thing that shows up in those stories. What do you make of the first two lines? The setting of the scene here. Do the skies exist?
unnamed.
Unnamed. Does the earth exist? But interesting that the point that's being made is that they aren't named. Oh, Kevin Murphy right here. Naming is the fundamental activity of this creation story. Kevin, are you looking at my slides? Did you get access to them before? Yes. There's a lot of focus on naming. The skies above were not yet named, nor the earth below pronounced by names, nor names pronounced, destinies decreed. This is mentioned multiple times, and this is just the first paragraph. You go through. Things exist in terms of matter, physically. When we think about creation, we think of like material being formed. We already noticed maybe the first thing with that is like, well, if it's material being formed, if it's the initial seed of matter, well, there's water there, so that's a little problematic. And then in this story, we yet again have pre-existing stuff, skies, earth, whatever, but it doesn't have a name. So now I'm going to go back to the verses that I skipped over. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. God separated the light from the darkness, and the darkness, or he called the light day, and the darkness he called night. There's evening, there's morning, the first day. So here, we have naming again. God called the light day, and he called the darkness night. God named the lights. When something was made here, there was a name given to it, a function given to it. And in fact, good question Dr. Walton poses, why not call the light light? God said, let there be light. Cool. And then he called it day. I mean, could just call it light, right? Have to make it so complicated, God? Like, what's happening? What's the point? Have you ever wondered what it means to separate light from darkness? Kristen, I know you've read Walton's commentary, and so but what is this? What's happening right here? Time. Bingo. There's a function being given to it. There's a purpose being given to it. You name it day. He made a period of light and a period of darkness. You have light. Now, darkness was there before. Remember? Darkness was hovering over the deep. Then there's light. Then they're separated. And he called the light day and the darkness night. So they're distinct. And there was evening, there was morning. Are the sun, moon, and stars there yet? But there's evening and there's morning. What's being said here? Of course, if you're, and I think this is my next slide, you're going to have a little bit of a problem if you're talking about, what does evening and morning mean if you don't have the sun, because that's the way that we describe our days, right? But you have a period of light, a period of darkness separated. The idea is time. That's what we're getting here. It has a purpose and a function. Yes, okay, so I said, let's practice this thinking here. This is fun. So it's the difference between, let me not skip ahead. So I have a tea kettle here, and you might be able to see on there's a very faint steam coming out of it, but it's boiling. So my question is, why is the water boiling? Because it's hot? Yep.
A flame underneath.
So there's a flame underneath, right? So it would be something like this. You have a liquid, and the flame underneath gives it energy. And that energy then excites the molecules that are inside it. And then pretty soon they can start, breaking free from their chemical bonds. And then there's a matter of state change from liquid to gas. And then it's coming out the top. That's where the steam comes from. It's the gaseous form of water. That's kind of the way that we think about it. It's exactly right. That is one of the reasons the water is boiling. Another reason that the water is boiling, though, could very well be because we're having a tea party. Do you get it? There are multiple layers of understanding. The way we think is the what and how. And when we're thinking of creation, we're thinking like this. What's the formation of matter, the liquid to gas, where did this come from, the cosmos? What Genesis 1 is getting at is the tea party. The why, the purpose. What do the things do? And so if we start reading Genesis 1 that way, we can start asking questions about what are things for. And of course, what's the primary thing of focus in creation in Genesis?
Creation of humans, to
Humans.
delight man, to delight you, to delight
Yeah.
God,
Hey, what are we for?
to delight God.
And I think this is where Genesis is going. So, if we attempt to take Genesis as a story about material origins, we've got problems like I mentioned. There's light on day 1, but there's no sun, moon, and stars until day 4. How is there evening and morning if there's no sun and the moon? And you can, and there's answers to this. There's a website called Answers in Genesis, which take a young earth material creation view of Genesis, and they will go through all of their answers to these questions. After all, they're called Answers in Genesis. And you can judge for yourself whether you find those compelling or whether you find this particular view more compelling. But you have to say something like, okay, there's a temporary light source for a while, but then God took the temporary light source away. Or maybe it was the Shekinah glory and then that was hidden. And there's, I would say there's quite a lot of speculation going on in there. For me, though, the why view, the purpose and the function, I want to say this. I'm not taking the text metaphorically. I'm not telling you, all right, Genesis is metaphor. No. Please don't mishear me. I think I'm reading Genesis literally. But it's what it was literally meant by the author. What does literally mean? I don't want us to think that literally means what we would concretely read out of the text as 21st century people. Like I said last time, it was for us, but not to us. It was written thousands of years ago. They had a different understanding of the world and how it worked. If we want to understand what it literally means, then we literally have to understand what they literally thought. And so please don't anybody think that I'm saying, we're allegorizing this or reading it as a metaphor. I believe that this is quite literally what God was trying to communicate through the author. And that it's us who have to take the hard work of getting ourselves into that cultural context. All right, so yes, the conclusion about the why of the story can be seen in the text of Genesis 1. The ancient Near Eastern stories, I think, are bolstering the credibility of the argument I'm about to give you, but they're not the reason. I'm not saying that it's functional or purpose origins just because the Enuma Elish has functions too. I think that's in the Genesis 1 text, and it's just bolstered by the fact that that's the way that ancient people generally thought. All right, so when you look at Genesis 1, I've broken this down a little bit, you can start to see the functions and the purposes. So you have the dark deep, the chaos. So you have the darkness over the face of the deep, that's there at the beginning, and then let there be light, and then what happens with it? God calls the light day and the darkness night, and we have the functions for time. The waters were there before. It's not the material creation of waters, just like it wasn't the material creation of darkness. But then they're separated out, and there's a dwelling space for God, and there's dwelling space for humans. And then the waters get called the seas. So now they're named, and then they're given a function later. You're going to be the habitat for the sea creatures. That's the purpose of it. The celestial lights, let there be lights in the vaulted dome of heaven. So we read that earlier today, the sun, moon, and the stars go up. Why it doesn't just say, okay, and then they were made. It says they were made as signs for appointed times, days and years, another translation for appointed times, and some looser translations, seasons. So there's this calendar function that goes along with them. The sea creatures are given a purpose there to be fruitful and multiply. Humans, so we have let us make humankind in our image and likeness. And the humans are given multiple charges. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Rule over the fish and the birds and the animals. Till the garden and keep it. A role to actually work alongside God in the garden. Naming of the animals. We'll get to that in a bit, but that probably seems awfully significant based on what we were saying a little bit earlier. So something is created and then it's given a purpose. And that occurs over and over in the opening of Genesis. So the second point I want to make here is that God is giving things their purpose and function in Genesis 1. That's the story. That's the revelation. It's what things are for. It's not the liquid to gas story. It's the Tea Party story. John Walton uses a somewhat similar analogy, come to think of it. He's like, if you show up late to a party, I'm sorry, not a party, you show up late to a performance, like at a theater. You sit down next to someone, you're like, hey, what did I miss? Is the person going to say, well, the theater was built in 1945 and it's made of cedar wood back there, and then the drywall was sourced from this particular place? Like, no, it's going to tell you what you've missed so far in the play. So that's that's sort of the different level of meaning that I think is going on here. This is not an account of how or what, but of why. So then that gets me to, cool, humans are made. This is about functions and purposes. So what are we here for? And I think that is one of the main points. We're going to get to the other main point in actually a later class. But we're talking about creation and humans today. And we're going to talk about God's position in this creation, probably not next week, but the week after. All right, so why are we here? Sorry, I'm going to take you back to the ancient Near East a little bit first, before we'll get to answer that question. So what are humans for? Well, the yeah, I keep sometimes saying like a Hazarus, from Book of Esther. That king, every time I look at this, I keep on saying a Hazarus. But the Atrahasis epic. So that's Akkadian. So that's also around this whole area. The opening lines of the Atrahasis epic. When the gods instead of man did the work, bore the loads, the gods' load was too great. Their work was too hard. Their trouble was too much. Don't take my word for it. It's literally chiseled in stone. Like, that's the beginning of the problem, the setting of the scene, what is motivating? You don't know what the story is going to be about. Okay, let me tell you what the story is about. It's going to be before the human race was here, and the gods just had to work way too hard. That's the setting, all right? So what's the solution? Their work was too hard, their trouble was too much, and I will say, this is not the next line. This is like 600 lines later, okay? Like I said, these things go on and on. Every day the earth resounded, the warning signal was loud enough, we kept hearing the noise. Okay, Beletili, the womb goddess, is present. Another female goddess, just like Tiamat. Let her create a mortal man so that he may bear the yoke. So that he may bear the yoke, the work of Eliel, let man bear the load of the gods. This also shows up in the Babylonian, the Enuma Elish. Excuse me. This down here, I will create Lulu, man, on whom the toil of the gods will be laid, that they may rest. Of course, not the toilers who are resting. It's that the gods may rest. In the ancient Near East, humans were made to serve the gods because the gods, they might be gods, it's too much work. And so humans would work for the gods. They would sacrifice for them. And the gods would speak rather imprecisely, if you will. So you had the priests in the temple, and there were these divination rituals to find out what the gods needed. And maybe they need food. Maybe their house is just not quite big enough. That's the temple. So you need to expand the temple. Maybe they're bored and they want some music. Maybe they need some of your tithes. They're hungry, they need some of the crops. So what would happen, and the gods' needs also were very petty or like carnal, often pleasure oriented. Like they wanted the fancy house, they wanted the big feast, they wanted the beautiful music. And you had to do that, and in exchange, humans would receive the blessing back from the gods. This is known as the great symbiosis, at least that's the way that Walton talks about it. So, and then how would you know if you're doing a good job? Well, if things are going well, you're meeting the needs of your gods. After all, there were no natural phenomenon because everything was the gods. So if you were getting storms, it's not that there was a low pressure system going through. It's that you did a good job with your musical performance yesterday about how I was happy. And then you would like, this is what happened. Like that musician becomes exalted because that musician played to Baal and now the storms came through. So Baal likes this person's music. So this person gets to be like special musician. And in case we need more rain, we're going to trot you back out. All right. Because you liked it last time. But then if it doesn't happen, well, maybe you didn't like that one. Do the other one. You see like how this starts to fit into what we think, like when we think back to how ancient cultures worked, and we're like, why did they do that? That makes no sense. It's like, it's because of this sort of enchanted understanding of the world. So things are going well, you're pleasing them. Things are going unwell. You are either not sufficiently meeting their needs or the things you're giving them, they just don't like corn. Stop. Actually, were they even growing corn? Probably not.
It's a New World crop.
Yeah. So no, they definitely don't like corn because that's from the New World. They're mad. They want olive oil. I don't know. Actually, they probably did want olive oil. So one similarity is that in the biblical story, humans also are made for work. Genesis 2:15, the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, you may freely eat of every tree in the garden. But this part here is to till the garden and keep it. Work was part of the vocation for humans in the Genesis story. Now, are we working to satisfy Yahweh's needs? No, big difference. I was thinking about this morning. I don't know if I could quite convey just how different this is in that ancient culture from anything else. Like, what do you mean you're not feeding or sheltering or clothing or pleasing your God with music? Like, that doesn't make any sense. That's borderline atheism, all right? It would sound like, I don't know, Scientology to us, which is a very, very strange conception of your God, because that is what the gods needed. That is what the gods did. This idea that we do not have to serve the needs of Yahweh that there's another reason for all of this, is a dramatic difference that is, it takes a lot of contemplation to really get just how vast that chasm is. Another crucial difference, so in the Enuma Elish, humans were fashioned. You have here Kingu. From the blood of Kingu, the very last line here, I won't read the whole thing because we're coming up on time. Humans are made from the blood of Kingu, who is also Kingu and Tiamat together. I'm just excerpting a small bit of it. So the blood of a slain god is what humans were made out of. Humans, in Genesis 1, we get, let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness. And the material for humans is remember that you are
Dust,
and to dust you shall return. It is the combination of the dust and the breath of God, right? That's what humans are made. And they are made in the image and likeness, make humankind in our image according to our likeness. One thing I also wish I would have said last week, because I had talked about this as being divine counsel imagery last week. God is speaking to the other heavenly beings. If you go a little bit further here, God, Yahweh, is the only one doing creation. So it's just a point I wanted to make, that even though God is speaking broadly to the council, all of the creation is done by Yahweh. It's not facilitated or helped by any of these other entities. And indeed, that you never see those other entities engaging in a creative act. So anyway, that's a little bit of a side note. But yes, we are made in God's image according to the likeness of the divine. So this image of God, what can we know just from the text? There's not that much that it says concretely. We know that both male and female, men and women, are made in the image of God. We know it makes us different from the animals, and in some way it makes us like God. So what can we do with this? And I'm going to give a quick credit here to Dr. Michael Heiser. His book, The Unseen Realm, has this. Walton also parallels this interpretation. So both of them. Michael Heiser, I brought up the Logos Bible Software thing. He's the academic editor for Logos Bible Software. And so all of his stuff is available for free in Logos, which is great. All right, so the image of God. What have we heard of as the image of God before? Just shout out things that you've heard before. Creativity. Spirit, soul. Emotion. Love. Yeah, so some others, many of those are on the list here. I took Dr. Heiser's list from his book, which includes many of those, but intelligence, reason, you have emotion. Some people say the ability to pray. Things like self-awareness, language has been called the image of God, the soul and the spirit, free will, conscience. So the idea that there's some standard by which we seem to be have embedded within us that judges us. So these are all things that have been offered, and many more, some said here, some said elsewhere, as being the image of God in humans. All right, what might be a problem with calling any of those things the image of God?
It's very limited. It's what we see. It's not from God's side.
It humanizes God?
Okay, humanizes God. It's limited.
Well, some of those we can apply to animals as well.
And we know one of the things from the text is that whatever this is, it has to distinguish us from the animals.
Seems like it.
Yep. So that is indeed one of the problems. Is some of these have these traits. You can measure relative intelligence on some animals. The Bible actually uses the word nephesh, the word for spirit, to describe the animals in Genesis. It says they have the nephesh of God. Emotions, any of you dog owners will know that your dog can display difference in emotions. Sometimes they're playing and sometimes they're scared. You can see this in other animals too. So like emotions, is that the sole propriety of humans? Probably not. It's a difference in degree, not a difference in kind. And what might be another problem with it? Question might be, do they describe all humans? So if you're going to say reason, if you're going to say conscience, if you're going to say prayer, there are humans, either people who have very diminished intellectual faculties due to injury or old age or disease, who can't do those things. People who are psychotic, perhaps, would fall into that category. And then, there's the question of humans in the womb who also cannot do the same thing. So what you end up doing if you pick some of those is you're including some animals and not all humans. And also, you'd say, we're arguably about to get to the point where AI can do some of this too. Anybody know? Oh, shoot, the thing is covering that up. But yeah, that is HAL 9000, 2001: A Space Odyssey. So yeah, AI is approaching some of these things. And I don't think that, God was trying to tell us that eventually Watson from IBM is going to be in the image of God. All right, so how did the ancients think about this? Again, to try and understand the Bible, the ancient context is essential here. How did images function? The concept of an image of a God was one that existed, though not humans being made in the divine image, but we can nonetheless use that to help us. Physical images of gods were placed in the temples. So the last thing that would go, if you're going to dedicate a temple to a god, the last thing that's going to be placed in there is the image of the god, and then there's going to be the opening of the mouth of the god so that the spirit of the god can go in to the image. This wasn't equal to the god. The god was not the stone carving, but it represented the stone carving. It showed you whose house this was, whose temple this was. And it was a way to approach and encounter God in that house. Also, were kings considered divine in the ancient world? Yes. Kings were seen as divine. Physical images of the king were placed in colonies. They were placed everywhere. Why were they there?
So they can worship them.
Yeah, show you who is in charge. And did Nebuchadnezzar want people to worship him? Yes, Nebuchadnezzar wanted worship. Did the kings want worship as gods? Of course they did. So these were divine images, and they laid claim. They said, this is who is in charge. This is your God in this area. So again, nobody was confusing the coin or the carving or anything with the king. We all know the king is in his castle, or not the castle, but in the palace. But nonetheless, it is demonstrating the identity and the claim on that particular part of physical space. Genesis 1:26 seems to function similarly. Humankind is the manifestation of the claim that God has on creation. We are the images of God here in the world. We're like the signs and the symbols of who's in charge of the place. The image of God is not a quality of humans. It's not any one of those things. It's a status of being human. It's definitional. And Dr. Heiser's quote on here is helpful. I got one from Dr. Walton too. Humankind was created as God's image. If we think of imaging as a verb or a function, the translation makes sense. We are created to image God, to be his imagers. It is what we are by definition. Anything that it is right to call human is reflecting the image of God. The image is not an ability, but a status. We are God's representatives on earth. To be human is to image God. Does this sound like some passage in the New Testament we might be familiar with? Towards the very end of one of the Gospels? Again, it's the function and status that humans are what we're supposed to do. We're to go into the ends of the earth. This is the Great Commission, sort of at the end of Matthew 28. We're to preach the gospel. We're to spread God's image, the kingdom of God, through the world. We as humans, as Christians, we represent God in those places, and we are to basically take the banner of God to all the places that don't have it, and we're to reflect that there. Dr. Walton, the image of God in the Old Testament is therefore seen as a status given by God. So in conferring the status, God identifies people with him. In doing so, he's revealing the identity that humans should adopt if they want to conceive of themselves in a way that will allow them to properly understand how they should live in order to serve the purpose for which God has created them. Again, this is a status. It is definitional to being human. Humans are the representatives of the God. And you can draw that parallel to just like, the image of the God was in the colony far away, showing who was in charge. We are the image of the God here, or of God, we should say. Likewise, to do the same. This goes very much along with our mission to, take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And indeed, if we look at what comes right after the image, let them have dominion over the creation. I won't read the whole thing because it's now 10 o'clock. Further evidence here. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Where do I want to skip to? So out of the ground, the Lord God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air, brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every creature, that was its name. They gave names to the cattle and the birds of the air and every animal of the field. What's significant about that in the ancient Near Eastern context?
It has a name, it's real.
Has a name, it's real. And who's doing the naming?
People,
We
man.
are.
Yeah.
Humans are engaged in the divine creative activity of naming. God was naming before, then God places us in the garden, and then God brings the creation, and we name the creation.
It's too much work for the God.
It's just too much work for God. So we are God's co-workers. We are representing God, and there's no, please hear me here, there's no clearer evidence of that than this right here. That the function that was God's in naming things, the physical creation, yes, it's assumed. Did God create all matter? Yes, God did. Is that the story of Genesis 1? I don't think so. I think it's about the why and the functions and the purposes and the naming. And that belongs to God. Then God creates us. Then God puts us in the garden, says, you create or you till and keep it. And by the way, there's some naming that's got to be done. And that then is a status bestowed upon us. And this fits perfectly well with what happens with Israel. They become the ones through whom the blessing comes to the world. The treasured possession, the priesthood, the priests are mediators between God and humanity, the ones through whom Yahweh's blessing comes to the world. You see that all the way back in Genesis, and it's consistent with the theology that we'll get into next week, which is the covenantal theology, where that mediation and the blessing of God coming through human beings is more and more clear. So point 3, we are imagers of God. We are those deputized to rule and subdue the creation, tending the garden the way that Yahweh would have that done. So baked into the Old Testament, yes, it's a theology that, well, we got work to do, but it's not because the work's too hard. We'll get to that next time. So, all right, we're at 10:02. We got a little bit of time for questions if anybody has questions, but if all y'all want to get up, you can do that too.
I just had a thought.
Yeah.
Getting back to creation.
Mhm.
We're talking about day and night and all this stuff. You ever notice that it never says God created time?
Mm-hmm.
But he did.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is his way of creating time through all those first 2 or 3 days.
Absolutely.
It's all time involved.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right. Those first 3 all seem to be about that time and sequence and how that all works. I would agree with you. Great.
It's also about differentiating God from the other gods because he is the one that names the day. He's the one that names the night.
Mhm.
He has the power over the time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I don't know, I have a comment, but I don't know if I can make it quite clear, but I have a brother that we have some discussions with about these ancient Near East creation stories and then the Genesis one, and he just thinks the Genesis is a copycat. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they all more or less
Mhm.
are variations on the same theme.
Mhm.
But, I mean, could it not also be that, there was a lot of time between Adam and Eve, or the beginning of humanity, and Genesis?
Mm-hmm.
So all the people on the earth you would have think had some conversation as, of course, they spread out in terms of, so how do we get here? And
Yeah.
would Adam and Eve not have had conversations with God? So how'd you do all this? What's going on?
Yeah.
And so the similarities, I don't know, do make some sense to me, but of course then God's messages to Moses to write Genesis clarified
Mm-hmm.
where some of the principles had gone wrong
Mm-hmm.
in these stories.
Yeah. The quick comment I'll make on that is, how else would it have happened? Like, if we were to write a text today, it's gonna be in our cultural context. And we don't even know all the cultural context that's going into the text. We can't like go and highlight everything and say, that's my cultural context and that's my cultural context. It's just it's the water that we're in, it's the air that we breathe. We don't even notice what we're importing. It's the same thing then. If there's gonna be a story told, how else is it going to be told than in the idiom and the culture of the people at the time? So is it a copy? I doubt it's a copy. Does it share those ideas? Of course it does. That's just like anybody writing today, it would share our current cosmological idea. Big Bang is only really 70 years since it's been largely accepted by by astrophysicists. Before then it was a steady state. And I predict 300 years from now, people are gonna say, do you remember when people thought that all matter was at an infinitely dense point and it just went bang? So yeah, it's like, is it like those stories? Of course it is. How else could it have been? And then, then the question goes to, okay, well, why do you think yours is special? And, we would make the claim that there had been sort of fantastic and notable actions in history, in space, in time, that came from God, that are consistent with the revelation before and after. I would say, the resurrection of Jesus probably being the single greatest historical claim that Christians make. But we make claims about the Exodus from Egypt. So that it's not just a story, but we think that things actually happened, the plagues in Egypt, that were coming from God. But yeah, of course it's going to be cultural. The New Testament is in the Greco-Roman culture, which is not the same as the ancient Near Eastern culture. So there's no other way to communicate. See.
A really funny song to listen to by Bob Dylan. You guys mostly hate Bob Dylan, I'm sure, but he had 3 Christian albums, and one of them he did a song called "Man Gave Names to All the Animals."
I didn't know that.
Hilarious. He said, I saw an animal with milk coming out. I didn't know how. Oh, I think I'm going to call it a cow.
That's funny.
It's really cute.
So one thing, and I know we're almost at 10:15, but I expected to at least detect, and I will say through the face coverings, it's hard to read body language or expressions as much. I expected to detect a little bit more discomfort. And so I'm wondering if maybe the quietness is because, is anybody in here like, what you just told me about Genesis is just completely different than anything I've ever heard, and this is making me uncomfortable. Maybe you all have been hanging around me too much. Because there are certainly churches where this presentation would have me under church discipline and never allowed to teach again. So yeah, it's opinions change as you learn more, and so I don't think I'll have the same opinion 5-10 years from now. But okay, cool. Well, thank you all.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.